Live from a grungy kitchen table located in Annapolis, Maryland's scenic and historic capital, it's the Maryland Crabs Podcast. With each episode, your hosts, Tim Hamilton, John Fernay, and the occasional guest will dive in and pick apart the stuff that really matters most to you. We're too lazy to actually solve any of these problems, but we can definitely stir the pot. From schools, politics, parking in the fire lane, to those horrible people who drive BMWs. And here with this week's episode, live from the kitchen table, Tim Hamilton and John Fernay.
It's Maryland Crabs time again.
Hey, how are you? This is John Fernay.
And Tim Hamilton. We're jumping in for another episode of the Maryland Crabs Podcast. This episode, John went remote without me because they ditched me.
We did. That's right, because we didn't want you to join us for lunch at Leeward Market.
What'd you get anyway?
Huh?
They have good pizza. What'd you get?
I like egg salad sandwiches, which is kind of unusual.
Nerd.
And everybody gives me a hard time.
With the crust cut off?
No, it was on rye, but they make a really good egg salad sandwich.
Leeward's great. It's tucked way back there on Chester, right?
Yep, second in Chester.
A couple up from Davis's, a couple blocks up from Davis's?
Yep, 2 blocks away from Davis's, right around the corner from the Annapolis Maritime Museum.
I listened to the episode that John recorded, and we're going to listen to it again now. But I just want to say, just so you know, that when we go out on remote and we do interviews like this, and we did it with Robert Eades as well. If you didn't listen to the previous episode, go back and listen to it. But you're going to hear ambient noise, you're going to hear the clinking of dishes, and we like to think of that as charming rather than unprofessional.
Yeah. That's right.
So every once in a while you're going to have that. So just bear through all that. What we do right now is kind of studio work. That said, it was a great interview. So we're going to talk about it afterwards when we listen to it. But in the meantime, you can find us on the web at themarylandcrabs.com and find us on Twitter at Maryland Crabs Podcast, at MD Crabs Podcast. We'll get this right at some point.
I'm sitting here shaking my head at him. Yeah. Nah, you screwed it up
and
again.
You know what? Why don't we add John, where they can find you on Twitter?
Me on Twitter? Mm-hmm. At I on Annapolis. That's right. EYE on Annapolis.
And I'm at Tim Hamilton 47. You can find me there on Twitter as well. And then on Facebook, you can find us at the Maryland Crabs page and the Maryland Crabs group. So do both of that. We're doing kind of an A/B test to find out which is more active. Right. 2 things in one. And then info at themarylandcrabs.com. So follow us to comment, criticize, make suggestions as to topics. Subscribe to us on iTunes and leave a rating and comment. That's very, very important. And recommend us to friends and enemies and relatives and anyone you can think of, because we were actually kind of taking off here and we're enjoying the ride.
We are. We've tapped in here. We've gotten a lot of downloads. We've got a lot of people talking about it. And there was a gentleman, presumably, on Reddit that had left a really nice comment.
And if you're not on Reddit, Reddit's awesome. Reddit is, if you're just rolling your eyes that you can't take any more social media, I love Reddit. And what Reddit is essentially it's just, you go to reddit.com and there's all these various subreddits, which are essentially, think of them as rooms where people post links and they chat about stuff. Some are better than others. If you're into needlepoint like John is, they have needlepoint. If you're into cooking, if you have anything, but there's one for Annapolis. It's the Annapolis subreddit, which is actually relatively active, and the people in there for the most part are anonymous. John and I are not, but we posted that we had the podcast there, and we got some really great feedback. One was Chesapeake 06 Tree, who was a great guy. He said he expected us to be 2 snotty white guys, which we are.
Yeah. We own it.
Yeah. But he said that he really liked it and he got a great perspective. So we like the comments, and there was a couple of criticisms in there, so we don't like those, but we'll listen to them, and they're important to us as well. But go to Reddit and join that and take a look at that.
Yeah, what we're looking to do with this whole podcast thing, too, is really just to have a conversation about what's important to Annapolitans,
smooth,
Anne Arundelians, here's a new word, and Marylanders.
You're drunk.
And whatever it takes. And we're gonna get some people involved.
Right, and we're going to start spreading out too. Right now, we're mostly Annapolis-centric, but in the next couple episodes after this, we're going to start spreading out. We wanted to build a base first, which we have. So we're going to spread out, and we're going to cut. Right now, this is the 3rd episode we've done on crime, and I think we've kind of fished this pond out. We're going to listen to this.
Well, we may go some more. We reached out to the Annapolis City Police Chief, Michael Pristoop, and we have not heard back from him just yet.
We wanted to be fair. We wanted to give, because we've thrown out some criticisms, we've thrown out some praises, but I think it's important that if anyone wants to respond to that, that they're given the opportunity.
Absolutely.
So the door's open. If you're interested in coming on, let us know. You have to have an interesting story.
Yep. Well, Tay, let's stop talking about us and talk about our guest here.
About us.
Yeah, I know.
Subject.
I know. But anyhow, like Tim said, I went out and I met with Jessica Pachler, who lives right on the fringe of public housing, and she really corrected me on this in the interview.
Yeah, I like that.
About that she doesn't consider it the fringe, but physically her house is located right across the street from public housing. She has literally dodged the bullets. There's been gunfire in her front yard. She's concerned for her family. She's a huge community activist, very active in City Hall, very active at the council meetings. And she's not one of the ones that says, hey, get this out of my house.
No, and the other part is you look at her as a typical white liberal, white guilt that she's going to make excuses for the crime. And she doesn't. She's not. She's very pragmatic. I think, she's... remember there was a trend a couple years ago or a few years ago, I think it's still going on with like the hipsters, the white hipsters
right.
who move into just ground zero of these bad neighborhoods in the ghetto, like Harlem. They gentrified it and they took pride in that, and it was because they had the stories that they were living in these neighborhoods.
Right. She's wants a community is what she wants.
Right.
And I'll tell you, with that said, let's just get right into it, and let's talk to Jessica Pachler from Leeward Market.
Let's go.
It's John Fernay. We're here actually at Leeward Market, one of my favorite places in Eastport for yummy sandwiches and a late lunch. And with Jessica Pachler. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Tim and I have been talking about public housing, crime, and just in general everything that's been going on in the city and how the challenges that we face. And we are. Just yesterday, unfortunately, we had our 9th murder over on Clay and Pleasant Street, which I made a horrible typo on the Eastport forum this morning. I put down president, and people were like, oh my God, there's another one. I'm like, no, it was a typo. But you've got an interesting perspective, because, I mean, you're a community activist that's been active forever. You're raising a family right adjacent to public housing. And what I think is just absolutely fascinating with you is that it would be very easy for you to say, get rid of public housing. I don't want this to affect my house, but you're not. You're all about let's embrace it and make it into a neighborhood.
Well, I am a community activist when it comes to crime and that issue by default, I think, because of where we live. But I love our house. I love living in Eastport, and I love the community that we live in. And I don't think that getting rid of public housing is the answer for anything. I think that making a community better for everybody, for the people who live within the public housing, for the people who live around the public housing, is going to be the best thing for the city of Annapolis. I don't think that just getting rid of the whole public housing and putting in, new higher income housing, I don't think that sticks true to Eastport's roots. I don't think it sticks true to our community as a whole. I mean, one of the reasons that my husband and I chose to live in Eastport, there have been many reasons over the years. We've been here for a long time, but has been the diversity. I wanted to live in a city environment. I mean, it's not DC, it's not New York, it's not a big city, but it certainly is a diverse community, more like you'd find in a city. And so,
without a doubt, I mean, you've got high rent and low rent.
Right.
You've got black, you've got white, you've got working class and
a
white
huge
collar,
Hispanic
blue collar,
community.
Hispanics.
You have it's a great mixed community, and you really within 5 blocks of my house, on sort of either any way, you just have a really great combination of different people that live there, and it's awesome. And I love that aspect. I love that we have water that we can access and woods that my kids can climb and hike in, and people of all backgrounds, and a lot of times the whole discussion of crime and everything in Annapolis becomes a black and white issue, and it really, I think, is a socioeconomic issue, because obviously there are plenty of people who are African American that don't live in the public housing. There are plenty of poor people who are white or Hispanic that live around the public housing, and even within the public housing, though they're a minority for sure. But I think, I think that Eastport as a whole will be bettered by improving the residences and within the public housing, improving, most importantly, the safety. Because if you look at the whole background of public housing, the whole reason for it is to create an opportunity for people to work on moving themselves out of public housing, and to work in moving themselves into situations where they are able to rent a home or even purchase a home, which is the ideal. But if you're living in any situation where you're constantly afraid of crime, where you're constantly afraid of drug dealers or being shot, or your children playing outside, you can't succeed in that environment. Nobody can succeed in that environment.
Well, now you've been in Eastport, and you're, like I say, right adjacent to Harbor House and Eastport Terrace. How long you been there? 18 or
we've been there 17 years.
17 years.
We moved there in
what was the crime situation like back in 99 or 99?
There's always been crime in public housing. We actually, the day after we signed our lease, somebody was shot. I can't remember now because it was so long ago.
Welcome to the neighborhood.
I don't remember whether they died or not. That's so horrible. I should remember. Outside of what used to be called Sankey's grocery store on Monroe Street. It's now called Portside Market. So there has always been crime, and it ebbs and it flows, and a lot of it, the ebb and flow. The ebb and flow obviously has to do with the external forces of the economy and drugs and that type of thing. But the ebb and flow also has to do with the management at HACA, and how. What role the board is taking, and what role the management is taking, and then also the policing from the Annapolis Police Department. It all sort of works in conjunction with each other as to what is the, what is causing the ebb and flow. Crime obviously.
Let's jump back into HACA a little bit here, because boy, if you look up dysfunctional in the dictionary, I think you're going to say see HACA. To a point. They've had a hell of a time, and I wouldn't even say since Vince Leggett left, because it preceded Vince Leggett as well. Long before.
I was looking up emails, going through emails the other day, trying to find an old email, because apparently I'm an email hoarder, and I have emails going back. I have emails going back to 2012 and even earlier. I think I had one even as 2009. Saying we need to switch this, we need to make some changes, we need to get some things changed. And even before, I even had this email account. I'm sure if I would had those older emails, I'd have that too. There's, like I said, there's ebbs and flows. But I think what it comes down to with HACA is you have an organization whose primary job function, in the end, it's a pretty simplistic job function. It's property management. And their number one goal should be providing safe residences for the people who live there. Right. It doesn't really matter, as far as I'm concerned, who is paying the rent or the mortgage for the people who, the rent for the people who live within HACA or within anywhere. They're part of our, we're all part of the same community. We all live in the city. We're all citizens of Annapolis. There are people who live in private houses that also receive subsidies from the government for various reasons, whether it's, a Section 8 or whether it's they're receiving, veterans aid, or, there are a number of ways that people are subsidized. Obviously, public housing probably has the most, subsidies when it comes to that, but when it comes down to it, the housing authority is supposed to be providing property management. And just like at any other community, if you want to compare communities, and I've said this probably too many times, but you can look at Watergate. Harbor House and Watergate were built at the same time by the same developer.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, they were built, and they were both built as luxury condominiums when they were built. So back in the...
Who built that? Do you know? Was that Burns? Bernstein, I know, used to manage.
No, Bernstein used to manage it. I forget. Somewhere in my head is.
But so Harbor House was.
So Harbor House, they weren't supposed to be. They were. They were luxury condos when they were built.
Wow.
So they were luxury condos in the late 60s and early 70s, I think, is when they were built. Mm-hmm. Same as Watergate, and then in the early 80s, they started to switch, and then I forget I don't know the exact year when the housing authority purchased them and took them over and turned them into the public housing that they are now. But so you can look at those two communities, and within each of those communities, both of those communities certainly have residents that are drug dealers. They certainly have residents that are drug users or residents that are criminal types of whatever sort. I'm going to say probably the same percentage. I don't know the percentage, but I'm going to guess it's somewhere about 5 to 10% of the community are bad actors, as they're called. And the problem is that in housing authority, those 5 to 10% are allowed to be the face of the community. Whereas in Watergate, those people are not allowed to. They are not allowed to sell or deal drugs in the parking lots. They are not allowed to sell or deal drugs in their units. They have to hide their criminal activity because if it's found out, they will be kicked out. And that is not happening at Housing Authority. And that's property management.
And it should be.
It should be.
It should be.
I mean, that's pure property management.
Well, right now the Housing Authority does not have an executive director. We do not have a director of security. We're down a couple of people. I know there's a board member that was just filled at last night's council meeting, or submitted to be filled at last night's council meeting, which incidentally gives the mayor Mike Panelides, that gives him 4 seats on the council at this point, on their board, which is a 7-person board.
I think so, yeah.
So he's got a majority, and he does have another appointment coming up next year when that expires. Who's responsible? I know we've gone back and forth. When Ellen Moyer was mayor, it was like, oh, the police can't go on HACA property. It's not the police's problem. It's HACA's problem. HACA says, well, no, it's not. And I tend to agree with HACA at that. I mean, you're part of the city. You're within the city limits. They're responsible for it.
Well, I agree, and I agree with both positions. So here's the thing. HACA the Housing Authority is not a federal reserve. It's not like the Naval Academy, which is a federal reserve. That's federal land. Right. So there are limits to what the police can do. They have to be invited. It's federal reserve. State House, for example, is state land. It's not city land. The Housing Authority it's public. It's private property that's owned by the Housing Authority, which is a quasi-public, nonprofit charter organization chartered by the state. So. And
it's no different than Watergate. This is somebody owns the property,
right? And
they've hired a property manager to manage it. So,
and the Housing Authority is the property manager,
right.
And they also own property. I think, from what I understand, I have not been able to get those records. I've tried in the past, and then I had another child. And I stopped trying. Got busy with something else. But so it is private property, and there are limits to what. Just like on our, your property and my property, the police just can't come onto my property and say and do what they want to do unless they think there's a problem. And they can only police things that are illegal. So a car that is parking on my property is only illegal if I have it posted no trespassing and no parking, and I say to the police, this car is illegally parked, please come and do something about it. It's the same on HACA property. So one of the problems that we have within the housing communities, and my experience obviously is mostly with Harbor House and Eastport Terrace, though I have friends that live in the other communities and have spent a lot of time just looking at all of this. But, so the police can't come. HACA needs to say, this car is parked, or we have now posted this non-trespassing. So in those emails that I found from 2012, 2013, there were requests to HACA. Chief Johnson was the head of HACA at the time, and to him and to Chief Pristoop to say, work together. Please come up with a posted no trespassing so that then the police can come in and they can do that type of thing. That never came to fruition. There are no trespassing signs.
And that was starting to come to fruition with Melvin Colbert, wasn't it?
Well, so what they were starting to do was parking stickers, which is another great way, because then it's not even a police thing. Then the housing community can just hire a regular tow truck company like Bowen's or one of the other companies.
No different than Ward 1 parking.
Ward 1 parking or Watergate or Annapolis Overlook or anywhere that they have, permitted parking. So everybody who lives in the property gets a sticker. Maybe they get a guest pass, and however many stickers it gets, and then the tow trucks can come through, and that can be a profit-making center both for the towing company and for the organization, because they'll get a slice of the fees, which I brought up, and but. So then they can come through and they're responsible for saying, okay, look, here's some. Because what happens in the communities is that the dealers have stash cars, and the stash cars have, and this is all public knowledge. They have drugs in them, and they, and people come in. And the other thing that is that a large majority of the crime that happens is not because of the people that live in the housing authority. I'm not saying that none of the people who live in the housing authority don't commit crimes. I'm not saying that none of the people that live in the housing communities, public housing communities, don't on occasion harbor criminals, whether on purpose or because it's a son or a grandson or a daughter that they don't know, which happens again in any community. It doesn't matter.
Sure, who doesn't?
It doesn't matter, right? You have your child, you have your grandchild. It happens. But if there was a way to eliminate people coming onto the properties, what it is that the housing authority properties have become safe havens for criminals. And so the people who want to live there safely and want to just live their lives and do the best that they can do are not able to, because criminals, whether coming from within or mostly coming from without, come onto the properties, commit their crimes, and create situations that aren't safe. So how do you fix that?
Yeah, well, one thing that shocked me when we were talking to Robert Eades a couple of weeks ago, and I've always heard that the problem is not so much with the HACA residents or the people that are living there, it's the outsiders coming in.
That's right.
And I made a very naive, as I learned, assumption that this was the, for lack of a better word, the rich white kids from Severna Park coming down to score their drugs because all these HACA people had the drugs. But what Robert said, that what a lot of it is people from Washington or Baltimore that are actually dealing drugs are coming down and using HACA as their office, if you will, as opposed, and that's more of a problem than, yes, you do have the rich white kids coming down from Severna Park to buy their drugs so they know where they can do it and whatnot, but he said, and that's the problem. And then you get into this whole turf war thing, where you may have some bad players that are in HACA that say, hey, no, this is where I sell.
Right.
And now you've got some bad guy from D.C. that's saying, hey, no, this is where, I'm selling here now. And then you get gunfire coming. Right. And that just absolutely shocked me. I just didn't even really consider that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's been a safe haven. It's a safe haven for people to come and deal and sell drugs and buy drugs. And then, as it gets worse in any one community, it goes out to the outlying communities, because then people that are then coming in to buy the drugs, they need money, so then they start robbing houses or breaking into cars, and it becomes a larger community problem. And unfortunately, within the city, it only ever comes to the forefront when that happens, when crime starts to increase in the surrounding community, because otherwise it's sort of easy to ignore, because the people who make the decisions aren't living there. They're not living on President Street. They're not living on Tyler Avenue. They're not living within the community, so it's not really affecting them until their constituents start calling and saying, wait a second, we are being affected.
Now it is, sure. Well, I mean, I was robbed twice last year, and right. I mean, I'm not immediately adjacent to public housing, but I've got Ben's Drive is a very short walk from where I am. So, but yeah, no, I mean, and we've also
that's an important part. It's not just public housing. It's the low income communities across the board, though the majority of and. In the lower income communities that are not public housing, that's where the police have more of a say, because it's not a swath of HACA-owned land. It's more public. There's public drives and that type of thing. But those are also the communities that, when they've gone into public-private partnerships, have seemed to do better, because they have security and because they have, they are doing a better job at managing their properties.
There's probably room for improvement there. Well, I mean, we also talked about community policing, and we're going to try to get in touch with Chief Pristoop, which he hasn't returned our call just yet. But community policing, to me, seems to be a no-brainer for me. And my neighborhood is not public housing, but I think you have the same cop coming in. Maybe he's driving through one day, maybe he's riding his bike the next day, maybe he's walking down twirling the nightstick. Right. I jokingly said, if you want to stop crime in my neighborhood, give the mailman a badge and a gun, because he knows who's there, who's coming, who belongs, who doesn't, and how long they're gone for. And I think that's got to have so much benefit. But I've heard that there's this pushback from the city police to not go for that. Robert Eades said that he also seems to think that's the solution. You get a cop in there that knows the kids, they know how they're coming in, they know who's the good guys and who belongs.
In Eastport, we were supposed to have that. We have the NET team, which is the Neighborhood Enforcement Team, I think is the acronym for NET. And when that first started, it was great. It was 6 officers who were focused on Eastport, and they were in Eastport on a regular basis. And the whole point of that program was that they were supposed to be out on the beat, walking around, getting to know people, because there's a big problem. There's a big problem, really, in any part, and it's not just in Annapolis. It's any problem, any community where there's a crime problem, when there are drug dealers and that type of thing, is that you don't want to get yourself in trouble by snitching, basically. Right. You don't want to snitch. And so in a community where you have police that are walking around and you have a chance to get to know the police on a one-to-one basis, it's a lot easier if they're there all the time and they're walking around to be able to say, hey, Officer Joe, my next door neighbor is, I think he's dealing PCP, or I think he's smoking PCP, or, doing heroin or whatever.
As opposed to taking the initiative to call the police or to go down or to
right, because you take the initiative, who knows, there's this fear that somebody's going to find out. And I mean, I have that fear. I have that fear, just talking about this in general, but at the same time, I can't not talk about it because I'm raising my family in the community and I love Eastport and I want to be able to continue living there.
Well, I know when my naivete showed about 7 years ago, I was driving down Compromise Street and there was 2 kids, young teens, maybe like 11 to 12, 13, beating the hell out of each other in the playground. And truth be told, I was at the boatyard. I probably had a couple extra beers. I shouldn't have been driving, but I drive past and I get to the circle and I'm like, did I just see what I saw? And I whizzed around the circle. I come back and I parked in the middle of Compromise Street, and I turned around and I jumped out and I grabbed the. I went after the kids. One kid ran up Green Street or Newman Street, whatever it is there. I chased after him. My girlfriend at the time, she was there to see this kid is bloody in the face. There was a 2x4 thing laying there. There was another paramedic that was off duty that ran with me to chase him. We got the guy back. We get back there. The police were there at the time, and we're telling them what we saw and everything else. And they bring the kids, and I said to the kid that's bloody and bleeding, he says, "What happened?" He says, "Oh man, not much. We're just messing around." And I'm like, "What the hell is that?" And they said, "Okay, well, hop on in." I said, "Oh, you arresting me?" He says, "No, we're going to take them home. We know where they live. They lived over off of President Street." And I said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "Well, we're going to tell them parents and that." I said, "But this is what I saw. I saw this assault. I mean, the kid has." And he says, "No." He says, "If the child is not willing to say that he was assaulted,
right?
It didn't happen. Who's to say? It's your word, and you can't bring the charges." And he says, "And honestly, if he did say he got beat up, there's a good chance he might be dead in a week or 2, or beat up even more severely."
Right.
And it was like, wow. I mean, this is at that age, and it's just there's got to be something to be done, because I mean, Chief Pristoop is sitting there saying, "Oh, well, crime is on the decrease and nationally," and he's got all these statistics and figures. But when you look at the amount of rapes that we have that have happened in the city, and granted, some of them are inter-family,
right?
But there are some that have been unreported.
We're on our 9th homicide, and we just had our 9th homicide, which is devastating, right. And we haven't had 9 homicides altogether between 2012 and 2015.
Correct.
So,
2003 was the deadliest year. I think it was 2003 was the deadliest year with 11 homicides.
Right. So we're on.
And the city is actually very keenly aware of that number in that year. And I would think that if we exceed or tie that, that may be a catalyst to make some serious changes.
I mean, I think that there's. And so with the whole NET program, the problem is that there aren't the resources there. There have not been enough officers. We have a number of officers. We're not fully staffed as it is to the 114, I think, that we're budgeted for. Mm-hmm. There are some officers that are in training. There are some officers that are on light duty. There seem to always be some officers that are on light duty, which I understand people get hurt on the job. But it seems to me if we know that we are going to have at any given time between 10 and 15 officers on light duty, and what we think is we need is 114 officers, then maybe we need to be staffing for 130 officers. As it is, the APFO, the Adequate Public Facility, says that we need about 124 officers. That's actually the rate
that's in the code.
We should have. And I think that needs to be actual police officers, not the fire marshal, and not other people, but actual police officers. Because what I can see, and what I see, and I'm not an expert, I'm just a person who lives where I live and have friends, and when we all talk about it, it's just that there just isn't enough coverage. There isn't enough there aren't enough police officers to go around, and the officers on the street are working hard. They're trying to solve cases. They're trying to take care of everything. The officers that I've met are all, work really hard, and I really appreciate everything that they do. But I just feel like, I don't think, first of all, have enough of them. And I think, second of all, I think we need to revisit what we're doing. If what we're doing isn't working, and it's one thing to say that HACA needs to change, but if HACA isn't changing as quickly as it needs to change, then our city government needs to respond to that quickly, because this is a crisis.
They need to push that change.
They need to push that change, and whether they need to push the HACA change or whether they need to make the change in terms of our policing, so that while HACA gets its act together, or if HACA gets its act together, to make their residences better for the people that live, for their residents, make the residences better for the residents, that the city needs to come up and protect us. There's been a lot of, I've heard the same phrase over and over again saying, well, the community needs to help us help them. And, it's true that there have been years where this has been going on, and there has been a lot of reticence from the people who live within public housing to step forth and say something. But 2 weeks ago at the city council meeting, how many people came out and said something? How many people came out and showed support? And it was the head of the Residents Association, the head of the Residents Association at Eastport,
representatives from every community,
representatives from all the different communities, saying, please help us. We are here. Work with us. And that needs to be taken up. I'd like to know, what has the city done? Have they reached out to the people that spoke up and said, okay, let's sit down together and come up with some ideas? Because the people who are living within it are probably going to have a pretty good idea of what would help them and how they could help the city help. And I agree, community policing, I think, is huge.
Well, from your vantage point, do you think the city, two-pronged question, the city has vis-a-vis the administration, the mayor and the council, as well as the police department, the leadership in the police department, is doing enough to support the officers that are out on the street that are trying to do?
I think that more can always be done. I think that the administration is actually, and I think the administration currently gets a bad rap because of what's going on, but is more proactive towards making change than previous administrations. Just in my experience with response and and seeing what's happening and seeing some of the changes that have been made, I think they are more proactive. But I think the administration of the police department needs to be more proactive. I think they tend to be reactive. We hear all the time that according to statistics, crime is great in Annapolis, and we shouldn't have to worry about that. The crime is targeted. And so people who aren't being targeted shouldn't have to worry. The crime is better than it was in 2007, which is, those things all might be true, but they don't say that where we're living is safe. And the on-the-ground feeling of people who live in the city of Annapolis, particularly those who live in Eastport, Newtown 20, some of Clay Street, Pleasant Street, is that it's not any better. That we do have a problem.
Well, I think part of the problem is, or issue, or the perception is that they've sort of changed the definitions, and it's sort of like the city changed the way they budget things. So now you can't really compare apples to apples from year to year, because they've gone to the project-based budgeting versus the line item budgeting. And the police department also did something similar, where they're considering domestic violence used to, so that was something that we've done there that is sort of changing that. I think it's a great insight that you've got. You're living on the fringe of public housing. You're in the crossfire, literally. You're keeping your children safe. That one horrible morning in April, I believe it was, that had the 30 shots out in the middle of the street. Thankfully they caught the guys that were responsible for that.
But that was just one. In the 4 months, we had a shooting on Christmas Eve, and between that and the April shooting, and the April shooting, nobody got hurt. It was just cars that got hit. Nobody got physically hurt.
Right.
Mentally, maybe there were some problems. Anybody who deals with that outside their house is going to, that affects you. But in the 4 months before that, or leading up to that, we had somebody that was actually shot and hit at least once a month at dinner time. So 4 times, my family and I were sitting at the dinner table having dinner, and shots rang out, and somebody was hit. And this is in the middle of the night. This isn't, and that's a problem. And it wasn't until the 32 shots were fired when no one was hit that really there was an impetus for change. And I mean, if that's what it takes to get it, as long as there's impetus for change, but it saddens me and it upsets me that it wasn't the very first person that was shot back in December of this, this ongoing thing. I live, and I don't consider myself living on the fringe of public housing. I consider myself living across the street from an apartment building where the people happen to get get their residents paid by the government. I have really good friends that live there. It's not I think if you don't live there, it's much more of a stark, or maybe even if you do live there, there's this dividing line, President Street on one side and President Street on the other side. But what I'd like to see is that the city as a whole work together so that it's not that.
Let's blur that line.
Let's blur that line because we're all residents of the city. We're not, anything different.
Well, you've been vocal. You're vocal at most of the city council meetings. You can not go very far without hearing your voice. Running for alderman? Any chance? Any thought? Desire?
I have a small ward within my house of people that I need to manage.
Right.
So
throw that in. Well, I mean, certainly you've got some great ideas. You've got some great perspectives. You've got history behind you that you've been here. I mean, you're not somebody that just moved into the community. You've seen how the problems, and it's not just crime. I mean, you've got traffic and everything else, and density, and everything that has evolved over the last 20 years that you've been here. Right. You've got your finger on the pulse of the community. You are the producer for the Eastport Rockin'.
I am producer.
When's that going to be?
June 17th.
June 17th. Tickets on sale when?
That's a good question. when we get them up.
But the Eastport Rockin'. I mean, you're with the Eastport Moms Club. You've got the 4th of July, the Eastport Parade.
Those are all things that if I was going to be an activist about anything, those are the things. Education, creating community within the community. That's what I really like to do. I would like the crime issue to be resolved so that we can all get down to the better parts about living in a community. That's what I would like.
I wonder whether the mayor would consider an ad hoc committee that would really give them the authority to really address the crime and work with the police and really give them, some balls to leverage on the police department.
I think that would be the ideal thing. I think just in general, an ad hoc committee on this situation. I've offered my time. I know there are others within the community that have offered their time. Whether it's a group within our ward or a group within the Eastport Civic Association to some way, but a citywide thing would be great too. I mean, I'd certainly be happy to be a part of that because like I said, I love living in Eastport, and honestly, I don't know if this continues how much longer. You see people moving all the time, and I don't want to be one of those people that moves just because of the crime problem.
Is that a consideration for you? Is that a thought? Not necessarily you're considering it, but I mean, is that a thought that crosses your mind with you and your husband?
It does. I mean, it's a discussion my husband and I have, and just purely financially. The crime problems within our community make it difficult to move because it makes it difficult to sell a house. It makes it difficult to rent a house. I think, all of our neighbors have found that problem, and that's an unfortunate thing too because it affects everybody in a lot of different ways. It's not, and so that's why I would like to see it get better because, I have 4 kids. I can't, but we have a great school in Eastport, and it's a great community to live in, and I don't want to have to leave.
It's funny you mentioned school because I was looking out the window here. We're at Leeward Market at 2nd and Chester, and I see school buses moving. And I know you've got 4 children, and they're about ready to come out. So we're gonna wrap it up and let you bail out of here and go get your kids.
Speaking to that, just one thing is that. One of the things that when you talk about community is that we don't have walkable schools for a lot of our public housing communities in Annapolis, and I think that that's a problem, and I think that that's something that needs to be looked at as well. So
the Harbor House and the Eastport Terrace is being sent to.
They get bused to Tyler Heights.
Tyler Heights, okay.
Yeah, and so and that's a problem not just in Eastport, it's across the city. That you have communities that could walk to a school but are bused to a different school for whatever reason, and I think that breaks up and isolates communities. So I think think that it's all part of the whole picture.
That's a different fight for a different day, but we'll get back there.
Day.
But I will let you go get your chillin' and reclaim them for another night. And I thank you very much for coming out. Good having lunch with you at the Leeward Market.
Thanks. Go Maryland Crabs. This is great.
I think you can look at the racial element and say, well, they have a better understanding. I don't know if that's true or not. Any more than I would have an understanding of a white person who lives in public housing in Utica, New York, or or Cumberland, Maryland, because I've never lived that, and it doesn't matter that we share a racial identity.
Yeah. I mean, but there are success stories. And again, I don't know. I don't think he was ever in public housing, but another guy that I'm really impressed with, a young kid, is DeJuan Gay.
Yeah. I've seen the YouTube videos.
And I mean, he organized that peace rally.
Yeah, it's really cool. He's got a lot of, if you haven't found him, he's on, I'm not going to try and spell it, but he's on YouTube, and he's got some really interesting perspectives that I like.
Rumor was that he was possibly looking to run for alderman.
Which would be interesting to me.
Be interesting. I mean, currently he's in school on the Eastern Shore at University of Maryland.
He's like, 19? Something like that?
Yeah. Maybe 18. But he's a good guy. But I mean, I thought that Jessica really... I was so impressed with that her opinion and Eades' opinion... Well, and to a degree, ours has been very, very consistent that it needs to be a community, and the way to do it, I mean, you obviously look to make it a stepping stone, make it community policing to handle some of the crime issues.
Well, they also talked about the ground level policing. They both independently, and we had said that too, is that you have to have policing at ground level. There has to be a conversation and a relationship between the police and the residents, and that's just not happening.
Right.
And it's easy. You say, well, you don't know. I mean, all studies point to this. All the people involved say that this has to be done. And that's something I'm not sure why it's not happening. But they agreed to that. They both agreed that most of the criminal elements come from outside. But where I saw the divergence, which was kind of interesting, was that she talked about the power of the banning list. And she had a great argument or explanation as to what the police can and cannot do and what HACA's relationship is as a property owner, et cetera. But she felt that the banning list was working, and then she had an alternative for that, which was the parking permits. But Robert saw the banning list as a political tool. So I don't think looking back, we never got out of him whether he thought it was a good idea or a bad idea. He just saw an application to it, which was anecdotal, really, that he felt that it was not as effective as it could have been, and it was more detrimental. But I think that's something that has to be revisited. Because you do have people from outside the community who are coming in, and they're really ruining the lives of people who live there. Forget the people in Eastport, the people who live in those areas. Because if you think about it, there's not a whole lot of overlap between the criminal element in Eastport or in public housing and the residents of Eastport. Sure, you got the gunshots, you got the guns, but I mean,
that's just a location-based thing.
Yeah,
because that's where it is.
I think it's black on black crime that's occurring mostly. So I don't think that people are going, we're under siege. I think the people who live in public housing are under siege.
As well, absolutely. I mean,
primarily. I don't.
The majority of the people that live in public housing are good, law-abiding people that want to be there. They would love to get out. Maybe their lot in life or their lot in life currently precludes them from doing that. But the vast majority are not drug dealers and gun shooters and all of that.
Exactly, and it's hard. It's easy to stereotype that. It really is. I had a long talk with my kids about that last night when they were asking about Black Lives Matter and the Blue Lives Matter, and we're Irish, so we have police in our family, and it's so I told them I see both sides of it, and I said it's easy to stereotype on both sides. Taking a very small amount of bad actors and applying that to the greater population, and that's what everyone's doing. That's what Facebook's doing, and that's what the Capitol's doing in the comments. Is that everybody's taking the minority actors, the bad actors in a group, and they're holding them up as the typical representative of that group, and that's where the danger. We can't have a nuanced conversation anymore. Everything's black and white. There's absolutely no nuance, and that's what drives me crazy.
That's wrong. I mean, we've got I may have a crack dealer, a heroin dealer living next door to me in a white neighborhood just as easily as somebody in public housing might have.
But Jess said something, and I listened to it a couple times, to be honest with you, and Jess said something that was interesting. And Robert said something that was interesting, and I think she looked at HACA and kind of laid and said that it was pretty much the leadership. Definitely, Robert thought there was HACA. You and I have talked about that. I'm going to say this. This is where I'm supposed to say this is a combination of issues, a combination of factors. It's very complex. I don't think it's complex. I think that almost all the fault lies in HACA, almost all of it in the board. I think that.
Well, the board's not. I don't think the board's not giving them the direction that they need, and they do need money. They need. I mean, face it, you need money to execute a lot of this stuff. So whether it be security, whether it be repairs, whether it be cleaning, whatever. And a wrench was thrown into the works, and we briefly discussed it. That they've got. They fired their security people, the director of security. They fired the guards that they had at Newtown 20, and the mayor has just now appointed on Monday night appointed a new person to the board.
Yeah, I guess. Well, it was
by John Dillon. So he now has control, if you will.
He will be, but assuming that he's
with that confirmation, he will have control, if you will, of that HACA board.
Well, then it's not his feet at that point, but someone's got to do something because there's absolutely no transparency when it comes to HACA. I think we discussed this before. Is that the mayor makes appointments. Then
it's hands off.
Then they're confirmed by the city council, and then he has no power. No one has any power over them, and they can operate as they are now with no explanation to. And they owe that to the taxpayers, and they owe that to the residents, and they owe that to the people in Eastport. But I mean, this really bothers me. Why did they fire the head of security? They said they were going a different direction. Well, what the hell's that direction? No one knows.
Right.
I will say this, and Finlay Rhonda
Pindell
Charles. I'm just stumbling over that every time. She wrote a scathing column in the Capitol a few weeks ago that I found shocking. That she was pointing fingers around her that there's something wrong with HACA and that what's going on. I have no idea. Well, you're supposed to know that. You're an elected official, and if you don't know it, who else is going to know it? But I know that every time that HACA comes in to give their quarterly report, it's nothing but hand-holding.
No, there's not. There's nothing to see here. Move on.
Alderman Littman is the only one who I've ever seen even come close to taking them to task when it comes to financial management or to decisions made by HACA. But I mean, at the end, it's just I see these beaming smiles and go, "Good job, thank you. We appreciate you coming out." I'd like to see a firestorm and say, "What the hell are you people doing? What are you doing with this money? What is your plan? What is your goals? What are the programs you're putting together? What are your metrics by which you measure success? Where do you want to be in 5 years?" I mean, I don't hear any of this. These reports are fluff. They're all fluff, and generally they're all spins. By the way,
right?
These are. I mean, we just came out. I guess they mismanaged $400,000. But I didn't see any fireworks about that. I didn't see any columns in the paper.
Well, I'm also hearing that there's a second audit coming down from HUD on them as well.
But so I'm saying this. So, everything's a management problem. Wherever you go, if you get a bad meal at a restaurant, if someone screws up your car rental, it's a management problem. This is a management problem. And I'm not going to do the easy thing and point at the mayor, who, by the way, I think has done more to move forward on public housing
than any mayor in recent memory. Absolutely,
we're happy with the status quo. But
there you go, Mayor Panelides.
Yeah,
take your kudo, take your bow right now.
I'm not saying we've made any progress, but he's taken a lot of bold moves. And I don't think he can lose for winning. That if he makes a bold move, all of a sudden, he's looking to eliminate public housing, and I don't know what he's planning on doing.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because after they fired Mr. Brown, who was the head of security, I got a text from Robert Eades, and this was after we had spoken with him. And he says, "Okay, I'll go on record right now. I know exactly what the city is doing." Now, this is a little bit conspiratorial,
which is about par for the course for all three of us.
But he was saying that you let it degenerate to the point where the city is going to have to sit there, and it could be both crime-wise or it could be financial-wise if there is another audit coming down from HUD. If HUD comes down and says, "Hey, we're not doing anything for this," what's the city going to do? These are residents of the city. They're voters. They're entitled. Is the city going to come in? But Eades was saying, he says, no, the city is going to come in and they're going to run it.
I'm not buying it. I think I think it comes down to when you're looking at governmental management and something like this happens, it is either going to be incompetence or it's going to be conspiracy. And I just don't. To be honest with you, I don't think that anyone, nothing against the city leadership. No one is playing a long game like this. That I just think it's incompetence, and I don't mean stupid. I just mean, and incompetence is a strong word. Let's just say that it is hands off ignorance. That's what it is. It's
by the definition of ignorance.
Right. I think we go back to HACA again. I'm laying it at their feet. I think that the whole thing has to be restructured. I think that someone needs to hold them accountable, and they have to have power to do that.
Well, I will say that maybe Eades, not quite to the degree that he believes, bulldozers coming in and making big white mansions for big white people, but to turn around and say, let it get to the point. Maybe it is the audit. Maybe it is the crime that comes up where the city. Maybe it is the incompetence or the ignorance that you're talking about. That the city comes out and says, okay, enough of this bullshit. You now, whether they need to rewrite something, whether it be on the state level, the state contract, or not the contract. What's the word I'm looking for? Between HACA that established it, the charter.
Oh yeah.
That established HACA and said no. Now you have accountability to the city council. Maybe that's something that's coming down, and that's something that could be obtained within.
You have to hold the feet to the fire. No one's doing that. And I got to be honest with you, this isn't conspiracy. I mean, we have to keep emphasizing that we tend to that direction. But you look at the turnover from the HACA board, and just over the last year, it is ridiculous. I mean, that is not that. Look,
but it's not just board; it's the board and management too. I mean, you look at Joe Johnson, who was the director of security. He quit. You had Vince Leggett, who quit, who was the executive director. You had the woman that was
within a year.
The woman that was going to save the HACA,
who didn't show up,
came in, and she came in the day before. Said, "Yeah, no, this is bullshit, man. I'm out."
And no one's ever clear.
Melvin Colbert, who was great by all means, but the residents that were there, by Eades that was there, by Jessica, who thought he was great, all of a sudden they called him and said, "Hey, yeah, no, okay, later,
but no
bye."
one ever explains why.
No.
Then we go to what Jess had said, and you agreed with, and I agree, is as an ad hoc committee, which is, I think, just in us talking, you have Robert Eades, who lives within public housing and represents he's not an official representative, and let's say like Kenny Kirby. And then you look at Jessica Pachler, who's very positive about the community that she wants to forge. You have an ad hoc committee that is essentially not a steering committee, but some sort of advisory committee to HACA.
Sure.
Where but they would come up with the real issues rather than the issues that you see at 30,000 feet. They're at ground level. They're the ones who know the realism behind this, and then you bring the police in that, bring a liaison to the police, and you have all of them. They say, here's our concerns, because I've heard a lot of suggestions. This is not just people bitching and offering. I've seen people bitching and they're offering suggestions, but those suggestions are falling on deaf ears. How do we know that they're connecting with the HACA board?
Right.
And that's something I agree with that. That's
and also on that ad hoc committee, if everyone were to materialize, I think you've got to have some of the dissenters. You've got to have some of the people that are sitting there saying, no, we got to get rid of public housing. I think their opinion is valuable. I don't know that it's right. But I think that opinion needs to be communicated to the board of HACA that, hey, this is out here, this is done.
Yeah, I feel, and I'll let it go at that point, but I think that HACA isn't a tower, that they're completely separated from the people that they're supposed to be serving and from the taxpayers who fund them. I think they are completely isolated, and that is wherein the danger lies. One last question I want to ask you before we close this down, and it kind of jumped out at me because it comes down to statistics. Light duty police. We have police on light duty. Explain that to me.
They're injured. They, wrenched a knee, whatnot, that they can be on light duty. That means they're administrative. They're pushing papers.
All right, I'm going into a tricky place here. Like if you look at Montgomery County about 3-4 years ago, there was a scandal that I think it was something like 85% of all Montgomery County police officers, when they retired, they took early retirement and they were on disability. It was something like 85%. There's a Washington Post article about it, and it was a big to-do. The argument from the police union was that, hey, being a police officer is very dangerous, that they're prone to injury and everything. But everyone said, yeah, but if you look at the surrounding counties, they're not even close to that. So either Montgomery County police officers are in far more danger than the neighboring counties, or they're shenanigans. So I'm not saying the shenanigans, but what I'm saying is do we have a case? I mean, what is the percent? Like, if you're looking on paper, I sound like Trump now, I'm not finishing a sentence. If you look on paper and you have a certain amount of police officers, let's call it 150. But if some of them are light duty, those light duty officers aren't reflected anywhere. They're included in that 150 police officers. So you and I can say, hey, we're fully staffed. We got plenty of police officers to take care of public housing and the rest of the city, where in fact, the chief would say, well, yeah, but we've got blank number that are on light duty.
Right.
What do you think the percentage is?
I don't know. That's
Is
something.
that affecting
That's something. Let me talk to Ryan Fraser at the county, and I will talk to Amy McGez at the city and ask them what they're how many officers do you have out?
Point? You can be looking at a full complement of police officers and say, hey, we have more police officers per capita. We talked about that a couple episodes ago. We have more police officers per capita.
But if they're all pushing paper, it doesn't.
Yeah, now I'm not saying they are, but then that just jumped out when you said light duty. That just kind of jumped out at me going, well, wait a minute. Then all of a sudden, are we strong on paper? But then we talked about allocation of resources. Do we not have the resources because we don't have enough full, able-bodied police officers to do the job?
Something we can follow up on. And as I said, I've reached out to Chief Pristoop to see if we can get him on. Hopefully, he can spend some time with us, and maybe we'll come back in a couple weeks and we'll figure that out.
So in the meantime, I think we've kind of fished this pond out. We got an email from somebody suggesting we talked about what do you call it, the business
climate in Annapolis,
right?
Which
so,
is something
which
we
is
can
a hot
do.
topic, and we both have strong opinions on. So we're going to have Sean O'Neill, who was the former president of the ABA, and
he was the mastermind of the transition between the ABA and the Main Street Annapolis downtown partnership.
Advocate for businesses, and so we're going to talk to him in next week's episode. And if you have any episodes that you'd like to see us cover, any topics you'd like to see us cover, of course, send us an email, info@themarylandcrabs.com. And then, of course, we're going to do all the Twitter thing again. MD Crabs Podcast.
Yes!
Nailed it. And then Facebook, the Maryland Crabs page and group. You can post articles and comments and criticism. We'd love to hear it. Go back and listen to previous episodes. This is episode 5.
This one?
Yeah.
This is 4.
4 episodes. Listen to the previous ones. Recommend it to your family and your friends and everybody. Listen to Scott McMullen's podcast, the Annapolis podcast. Mm-hmm. He's got some great episodes in there. So he's the godfather of Annapolis podcasting.
Yep. And if you want to keep an eye on this whole crime thing that we've been talking about, like the last 3 years, you want to look at episode 2, 3, and 4. And that is our opinion, somebody that had grown up in public housing's opinion in number 3, and then somebody that lives near public housing in 4. And we may do something a little bit later.
Right. And they're all opinions, like you just said. So for the people who start squawking about percentages that we got wrong or facts.
Hey, we're coming into October, man. Boat show's coming up.
Oh, yeah.
Time to move out.
Exactly, yeah. All residents stay in your house. Don't go out. We done?
I think we're done.
Okay, so again, go back, listen to previous episodes. iTunes, we want some lots of stars, lots of reviews. And next week, Sean O'Neill from former president of the ABA.
Absolutely.
All right, see you
later.
This has been the Maryland Crabs Podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them in all the regular places, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.